Hello and welcome to Middlebury 5-0. I am your host, Officer Chris Mason, and with me in the studio today is Scott Milne. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Great to be here, sir.
Great to have you in the studio.
That's good.
So you're running for office currently. You're the Republican candidate in the senatorial race.
Yes.
Coming up in November.
29 days, I think, from today.
29 days.
From
okay.
Filming. I'm not sure about broadcast, but 29 days from today.
Are you counting down the hours?
You know, you got a lot to get done, so we keep track of, you know, getting daily goals, and so you got to be organized.
Sure.
And even then, sometimes it doesn't work out, so we'll see how it goes, but we're happy with how it's going.
So this is the U.S. Senate, so you will be one of the two Vermont senators if you're elected.
If I'm elected, yes.
Serving with Bernie Sanders.
Yes, yes.
Down in the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah. Yes, and you know, interesting, we were talking a little bit before we came on, Chris. If you're at home and you want to, you know, see what kind of, you know, stellar intellectual capacity Milne has, but as a U.S. Senate candidate, you know, don't not pay attention to this, but you know, just Google Scott Milne, David Letterman, and we got a lot of press in the governor's race 2 years ago for sort of having a misstatement in a debate, and I corrected it by saying, actually, I take that back. I'm born in Brooklyn, so my guess is Vermont will be the only state with two senators born in Brooklyn. I haven't fact-checked that, but if I win, it'll be Bernie Brooklyn and Scott Brooklyn, so we'll see.
Right. Yeah.
Hopefully that portends good things for us all.
Yeah, it wouldn't be New York, I think.
Yeah, no, I think Schumer's, I checked Schumer, he's not Brooklyn. I don't think, but I should probably check, but we'll see where it goes. So.
Right. So I guess the obvious question is what inspired the run, the candidacy? What is it?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I appreciate the question. I would say I ran for governor 2 years ago, and
I remember that. Yep.
I think I felt like Vermont was not going in a good direction, and we needed to change things. And I felt going into it, I go, well, either we're going to get crushed the way kind of everybody, you know, these 100 people in Vermont that all kind of talk to each other in the press all the time. I mean, they all basically said Milne doesn't stand a chance. So I said, well, either I don't stand a chance and I'll have done what I believe, or maybe there's a lot of people out there that, like me, feel like Vermont's headed in the wrong direction and they want a voice. And so I would say in 2014 I happened to be in the right place at an important time in Vermont history, and I think when the dust settled on that election, we lost closest governor's race in Vermont history. It was
a super tight margin. It was a hair's breadth.
It was. Yeah. It was, and it was, you know, and I feel like we lost the race, but in some ways I think we, me being kind of the less important part, but the folks that I was offering a voice to, I think we changed the direction of Vermont in a significant way, and we see that, you know, with the incumbent not running for re-election and pulling the plug on some of his more reckless, what I would describe, I know many people in Addison County disagree with me, but I would call some of his more reckless plans financially, those got stopped, and I would argue that was a result of our race. So I'm a business person, I got a small business, and you know, in business you look at how you get a return on investment. We put a lot of time and energy into that 2014 campaign. My son and daughter both played key roles in it, along with a bunch of other young people.
Yep.
And as I looked at 2016, if I was going to run for office in 2016, you know, not that I have to, you know, fib or anything, but I just want to say it constructively and politely. But as I looked at 2016, Chris, I think the biggest impediment that's up for election this year, between me and imagining being as optimistic as possible about my kids and grandkids being in Vermont and being, you know, optimistic about their futures, and even more so anywhere in America, I really believe, in spite of all the credibly good things you can say about Senator Leahy, he's an impediment to me being optimistic about the future for Americans, and I think he's been in there for way too long, and things need to change. And if you agree with me that you know, things are broken and you want to make a change, I'd ask you to think about supporting Scott Milne.
Right. So what are the impediments? What is it you feel is is holding, you talked about young people in particular, what is it that's holding the young people back in Vermont and in the nation?
Great question.
What are those challenges?
Well, I think we saw with, talking about Bernie Sanders, who, is on other side of the spectrum from me, but both Sanders and Trump, in my opinion, both got a lot of momentum out of this pretty widespread belief in America that the system is broken. And that we sort of, however you articulate it, but we have a rigged political system that leads to a rigged economy that's not fair. And it's not true to basic American founding principles. So I think if you look at specifically over the last 50 years since my opponent's been in Washington, we used to have a lot of these Dixie Democrats that were Southern typically, but conservative Democrats, and then typically New England Republicans like George Aiken, who I'll talk a little bit about if we have time, Chris. They kind of occupied the middle.
Yep.
And they went, George Aiken, who my grandfather was a state legislator, young lawyer from Barrie. George Aiken first got elected in 1940, called on my grandfather to come to Washington and run his office. So I'm a very, very lucky Vermonter. From the time I was 6, 7 years old, I fished a lot with my grandfather. And I've been hearing George Aiken stories for 50 years now.
Okay.
And Aiken was a spectacular public servant. And he worked in the middle to get things done. Lyndon Johnson, liberal, Democratic, Southern senator who became president, would not have been successful with his war on poverty, civil rights legislation, Great Society programs without George Aiken. I would clearly not without people like George Aiken, but George Aiken, a Republican, was one of his key ingredients in success. And I think those people are extinct in the U.S. Senate now. I'll be a centrist. I'll be more than happy to work with Hillary Clinton, should she be our president, try to bring her a little bit more towards the middle where I think things should be.
So you feel like things have gotten too polarized?
Too partisan, too polarized. And the two reasons I think are when Dwight Eisenhower left office in 1960, he had this prophetic goodbye address to America, which said, "Beware of the military-industrial congressional complex," which was a warning that you can't have special interest money that's dependent on the U.S. government for regulation or contracts paying for elections, or you're going to get what you pay for, which is a government that's no longer of the people, by the people, and for the people, but has morphed into a government that's of the people with money, by the people with power, and for the people with money and power. That's why Sanders and Trump, from two sides of the spectrum, caught traction this year. And I think it's inarguable that my opponent is part of that system, and he's been there for 42 years. And if you think things are great, you should vote for him, clearly. If you don't think things are great, I hope you take a look at my campaign and what we're talking about and consider me.
So you feel like we have this very adversarial system with two parties divided, a lot of bickering. And you mentioned money as well. And it seems like you're saying that the one is playing into the other, that those things are in essence the same problem.
See, now my daughter here, Chris, who is running my campaign and sort of is my boss, I'm going to go, Chris got what I was saying. Right. I'm getting better at explaining things. So thank you. I think that's exactly the problem that we have. It's I never really thought about term limits as something that we needed. But now I believe we need term limits, and it's because of this growing influence of special interest money and how it concocts with career politicians that are using the special interest money to protect their seats and get elected election after election. And you can look down in the weeds a little bit more, this sort of gerrymandering of congressional districts that goes on around the country. So almost every congressional seat in the country now is designed to be a safe Republican or a safe Democrat seat.
They have these weird shapes now.
Yeah,
they look like little amoeba.
That's right, and the effect of that, and why that, if you argue Congress and governors, but Congress kind of is like the farm system, and in Vermont it's a little bit different because we only have one congressional district. But in a lot of states, the congressional delegation are kind of the farm team to become U.S. senators. All of these congressional seats are gerrymandered, or the districts are drawn so that it's a safe Republican seat, and then the Democrats go, okay, you take that seat, we'll take this seat. Right. When you have safe seats, what you have are people that are in the center, like me, have a tough time winning primaries. So then when you get a general election, it's the two extremes, and it's a safe Republican seat, so this one is an extreme Republican, this one's an extreme Democrat. I think that's wrong, and I think America worked much better when Dwight Eisenhower was given his warning that we need to be aware of the military-industrial congressional complex. It was much better when you had George Aiken, New England Republicans occupying the middle. George Aiken, another great thing about George Aiken, he had this saying, we can't be afraid of Me Tooism, which means Chris has a good idea, you're the other party, but I should be saying me too, not damn Chris, he's the other side, that's a terrible idea. I mean darn Chris, sorry. And Aiken, Aiken got up in the floor of the United States Senate in 1966 and essentially said regarding Vietnam, we should declare victory and get out. You know, it was 9 years before we declared victory and got out and lost. And so he was a smart guy, and I know a lot about him. And Dick Mallory, my mom, Marion Milne, was an inspirational legislator in Vermont. I obviously know a lot about her, so I've got some good role models. And got Jim Douglas here locally. When I talk to Governor Douglas, I go, don't take it personal, but I only mention dead people when I talk about role models, Governor Douglas. Otherwise, if you die today, you'll be on my list tomorrow, I promise.
Hopefully it'll be a while.
Yeah, a long time. Probably by the time it happens, people won't care what my list is, but we'll see how it goes.
So I think about money a great deal. I think about the effect that money has on the criminal justice system, because that's my field, and it causes me some concern. The fact that a lot of the penalties for crimes are fines, and that of course affects people disproportionately. If you're wealthy, that's not going to be so significant as if you're really struggling. And your bail is again based upon money, and a lot of people would argue that the quality of representation that you receive as a defendant again comes down to money. So it's definitely a part of the system. I think one of the problems is people have a hard time imagining how that system would function if you took money out of the equation. So I'm wondering, like, what would politics look like without the money? What's the vision? Like, what's the dream of politics without the special interests? Without
criminal justice is a great example of that, I think, Chris. If you look at the '94 crime bill, which I think at a federal level a lot of people believe led to just decimating inner city families and tremendous problems for minority communities primarily. My opponent voted for that. Now, was the for-profit prison industry's lobbying dollars influencing votes, or was it a coincidence? But clearly the for-profit prison industry benefited from that '94 crime bill more than any private industry, I would argue. Right. So that's the special interest money that I want out. I would argue this dysfunctional, polarized government that has to threaten. My opponent voted for a government shutdown 2 weeks ago because he couldn't get his way on taking the spotlight off EB5, which he's got a bunch of problems with right now. So he's voting to shut down the government because he can't get his way on one relatively insignificant slice of the federal government. He criticizes the other people when they do that, but they all play this game. That causes uncertainty in the business community. What businesses need is predictability. Predictability will lead to economic vitality. As we get a more predictable, stable, sensible government in Washington, it's going to help generate jobs, improve the economy, need to work towards balanced budgets. That should enable more people to be economically drawn out of the criminal justice system. And it also is going to increase resources to support the folks that are in the criminal justice system. So it's it's sort of like a multi-headed, being, and it's all interconnected. But where the special interest money comes in is it should be travel agents like myself, police officers like yourself, teachers, farmers, step up, offer public service for 2 terms. In the U.S. Senate, is my opinion. I've taken a 2-term pledge. I'm going to work for term limits, 4 terms in the House. Then you go home and live under the laws that you made. You don't need to be spending every day at cocktail parties or fundraisers to raise money so you can get elected again. And you don't. And I would step back, Chris, and just ask people that are. I mean, if you already know you're not going to vote for me or you're not going to vote for my opponent, it's still good to know what's going on. But if you're unsure, look at our campaigns. My opponent has $6 million. Over $3 million came from special interests. We called on him last fall to run a $100 campaign in the spirit of George Aiken. George Aiken represented Vermont for 34 years and spent $5,000 total on all of his elections.
Right.
So that was 50 years ago. Now I'm running against a gentleman who's got $6 million, $3 million of it's from special interests. We challenged him to run a George Aiken campaign. Let's give our money to charity. Let's go talk to Officer Chris together and just talk about all these things, and we can disagree. And I think it would have been great for his legacy. I think it would have been great for Vermont. It would have been great for charities. Would have contributed to getting money out of politics. He declined that offer. So then, and he had some excuses. So we came up with this Elizabeth Warren template of a clean campaign, which Elizabeth Warren ran on and beat Scott Brown. He laughed us off on that. So I would say he's got a campaign where he says he's for campaign finance reform, and his talk sounds pretty good, but his walk is anything but consistent with his talk. We've designed a campaign. I haven't made one phone call to ask anybody for money. Don't worry after this, even though you look like you got a lot of money. I'm not calling.
Oh, yeah, I look wealthy, yes.
I'm not calling. Well, you've got that British. You're from a wealthy part of the Isles, I can tell. Some people will even take donations in pounds.
Have you ever been to England?
Yes, several times.
Yeah, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
They have a posh accent. Yeah.
Liverpool.
Really? I'm from Brighton.
Oh, right.
I'm from the south. Yeah,
oh, right.
Yeah, soft southerner. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I had a great, you know that Graham Nash song? I was in an upstairs. The army had the army had my father in an upstairs room in Blackpool. The army had my father while my mother was having me. You're probably too young for it, but it's just this great song. I remember hitchhiking through Blackpool one time. It was a great part of life. So, but we're not taking any money. We're not even soliciting donations. I think you're going to see legislative candidates in Vermont spend more money on getting elected to go to Montpelier than I'm going to spend running a campaign to go to Montpelier. So, on top of having a message of we need to have term limits, we need to get money out of politics, I have a campaign that's completely consistent with what my message is. I'm walking the walk of the talk that I'm talking. I believe if I'm successful, the style of campaign and the method upon which I'll get elected will amplify my ability to really make a difference in Washington. And people are going to look around and go, Vermont's a funny place, but that guy took out a senior member of the United States Senate for the first time in history, took out an incumbent in Vermont for the first time in history, and he got outspent 100 to 1. We better start paying attention to this. First we get Trump, then we get Sanders, now we got Milne who gets outspent 100 to 1. Times are changing. Let's get on board. Let's get money out of politics. And I think it's something that people want to do once they realize it's something they have to do to get elected.
Right. I think for a lot of people it's hard for them to even conceive of a political campaign that isn't driven largely by money. By finances, a large ad buy, making a big splash in the media world.
That's funny. We ran into, we were campaigning in Brattleboro. Kate O'Connor, who's a great Vermonter, ran Howard Dean's campaign, and she was reminding me, I forget the number, but I think Howard Dean, when he kind of discovered the internet for fundraising on a presidential campaign, I think he had $60 or $80 million, and it was like this unheard of amount. It was 12 years ago. Now there's billion-dollar campaigns. That's in 12 years. Just imagine where this is going if we don't change it now. And where it's going is, whether it's, you clearly are hands-on with opiate crisis every day.
Absolutely.
You can't plausibly claim that lobbyists did not have a role in creating this crisis. Pharmaceutical industry lobbyists, working with senators like my opponent, got legislation passed, and it's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, we have a massive problem with heroin addiction in particular, and it's rooted in the opioids. So people go to the opiates ultimately, but where it starts is the opioids. It's the
pharmaceutical.
It's the narcotics. It's the drugs. As you say, the prescription drugs.
Yeah, I think the OxyContin manufacturers' revenues last year were 2.3 times the total budget of the state of Vermont. Just on OxyContin, not on the company.
Right.
Mylan, Mylan's another, the bee sting medicine there. The president of Mylan's a senator, the daughter of another senator. Her compensation's based on stock price. The U.S. Senate passes a law to require schools to buy these, injectors at the discounted price, I think of a little over $300 or mid $300. There's $2 worth of medicine in it.
Yeah.
Milne becomes so profitable, her compensation in 6 years goes from $1 million to $18 million. Patrick Leahy's taken $20,000 from Milne lobbyists. There's just a lot of coincidences. There's no, illegal corruption there, but it's a corrupt system, and the system needs to change. And if you think you can change the system without changing the U.S. Senate, I respectfully disagree with that.
Right. Do you think there is any will to make those changes within the Senate, within the U.S. Senate? Do you
Well,
think that would be supported by other senators?
I think a message from Vermont of Scott Milne, a travel agent with no political experience, taking out the most senior member in the United States for the first time in American history, who, while being outspent 100 to 1, is going to get noticed.
Yeah.
And I'll work hard to find other people around the country that want to take out other people that are part of the problem if I'm successful. And it's not going to happen overnight.
It is very hard, when you, as a citizen, somebody who's, I make a pretty reasonable wage. I get by. I'm fairly comfortable. But you hear these figures of these campaigns, how much money has been collected, and you just want, if they could just forego all of that, get in a room, have a debate.
That's right.
And then devote that money to something constructive. They're spending all of this money on them conducting these campaigns, and none of that money is going to social projects. It's not going into the economy. It's not growing anything.
Absolutely.
It seems it's hard not to see it as a tremendous waste of resources. It seems like there has to be a better way for us to be able to get informed as citizens and be able to make a good choice based upon.
Just two quick comments, Chris. First of all, I totally agree with that. But even worse, where the money is coming from is, sophisticated companies where the executive team's compensation is based on their stock price increasing. Doesn't give $20,000 to Pat Leahy to be nice to Pat Leahy or any other congressperson or senator. They want a return on investment on that. That return on investment comes out of the pockets of consumers and taxpayers. So where the money comes from in the first place debilitates our economy from being successful. Instead of the most efficient company, often it's the company with the best connections in Washington. If we get the money out of it, it's going to level the playing field. It won't be a rigged political system that leads to a rigged economy. And I'm optimistic. Vermont's one of the few places where my story is possible. It's a small enough state. Got a family, even though I was born in Brooklyn. We've been here for about 100 years. I've got a travel business. I've got an office in Middlebury.
Right. Yep.
Got a bunch of customers I've been working with for many years. So at least people know who I am. And
a successful travel business.
Yeah, that's sort of an oxymoron.
It is. It's like saying you're a successful newspaper business almost in this day and age. It's one of those things that have been so devastated by the communications revolution, by the internet.
Yeah, and I would argue again, just to I'm trying to get elected. If you think of somebody who's I spent 45 minutes between 4 and 4:45 this morning working on my business. So I spent, in that 45 minutes this morning, I spent more time in the private sector than Patrick Leahy has in the last 50 years. If you think, and internet, I think, is going to look like child's play when we look at the disruption that's going to happen in our economy and in our workforce with artificial intelligence, robotics, just all these things that are rapidly upon us. I'm going to have a hard time staying on top of it, but I'll be much more nimble, agile, and I've got a track record of being able to survive disruption. And one of the things I'll say for folks that are listening, I've got great people here in Middlebury. That's a secret to our success. But not only am I alive with a pretty good-sized travel business, but I made it through 9/11. I made it through the meltdown, the economic meltdown, and everything in between, without eliminating positions in my company. And there's not too many, I don't know the numbers, but I bet it's less than 10% of the travel agencies in the country that can say that. So we pay attention to people, and our goal, just our business model was, let's grow the number of people, the number of communities that we can get a brick and mortar office into and break even. Our goal through this internet disruptive period is to grow as much as we can and break even. Sometimes I was wishing I could have broken even.
Right.
But you know, we're pretty good at that. You know, we didn't make a ton of money, but we grew our business throughout the last 15 years significantly.
The business was founded by your mother? Is that
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
My mom was started working in a travel agency in Manhattan across from Grand Central Station when she was 16.
Right. Yep.
And you know, just funny how life turns out, right? Your chance things that happen in your life. My mom was the youngest of 13 kids in her family. Her older married brother and sister, when she was 19, took her to Lake George on 4th of July weekend so they could get the travel agent discount in the hotel.
Right. Yep.
And my dad was in college and was working as a waiter, and they got fixed up on a blind date. So the rest was history.
Yeah.
And it was good. But for, you know, that travel agent discount.
So when did she found the business? When was that happening? Because I'm thinking, you know, a woman acting in an entrepreneurial manner like that,
She was a
that's
pioneer.
got to have been pretty unusual.
Very much, yes. Yeah, my mom, Marion Milne, a lot of people in Middlebury would know my mom. She was a very successful, pioneering small business person, first woman president of the local Chamber of Commerce, founded our company in 1975, was a legislator for 6 years, pretty effective, you know, arguably one of the few people you could say but for. You could fill in Bob Kinsey, Dick Mallory, Marion Milne, five or six legislators that arguably could be that person, but my mom very clearly is one. But for Marion Milne, civil unions would not have passed in Vermont. So she just is inspiring. I got my daughter here who's running our campaign. She's blessed. She got to spend a lot of time with both her grandparents. My dad was clerk of the House in Vermont. I talked a little bit about my grandfather. My dad died 8 months ago. And a local a story, this Vermont historian Paul Gillis said, Don Milne, he was a clerk of the House of Representatives, which is sort of like the parliamentarian service, you know, service bureau for legislators. Don Milne, in his roles working with citizen legislators over the last 50 years, worked with more citizen legislators than anybody in Vermont history. So it's another, and I heard a lot of good stories from my dad just about how you want to be conducting yourself to be effective in a quorum like that, and those are lessons that I think will help me. I think personal relations between you and I are not that much different than they are between two colleagues in the United States Senate. I feel like I got some pretty good Vermont values. I'm looking forward to trying to take those to Washington.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Scott. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, great to meet you. I'll think of you when I get to Brighton again, and if you get over to Barrie, think of me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I will definitely do that. Yeah, if you're walking along the Pebbles, Brighton Beach.
I have to
think of me if you go wading.
Yeah, do you still have family there?
I do. Yeah, I was actually there just a few months ago, so I go back pretty regularly.
And you fly out of Montreal when you go, or?
I did this last time, yes.
Yeah. And it's funny, it goes back, sometimes we see a lot of Americans going to Montreal to fly out, and then a lot of times you see the Canadians coming to even driving to Boston if they want the nonstops or Burlington, and a lot, it's taxes, currency, it's one of the reasons why you want a travel agent. And it doesn't have to be Milne, there's a lot of good ones in Vermont, we're a lucky state.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Scott.
Good. Great to meet you.
Wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir.
So until next time, drive safe, and may all your mischief be of the lawful persuasion.